4 French program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the 4th branch program. Welcome. Any topic, any problem looked through the prism of politics is very difficult to resolve. And that's the reason you see most politicians, they very more inclined to frame everything as politics, no matter what it is. There is not much difference between Democrats and Republicans. In fact, there is really very little difference. But if you listen to politicians, Democrats and Republicans cannot reconcile. Take any example. Take healthcare, for instance. Is it just a Democrats issue? Do you know of any Republican who would not want to be protected against the insurance which refuse to insure their loved one because of pre-existing condition? Do you? Of course not. No matter which social issue that we decide to discuss, no matter which social issue you decide to tackle, if you take any constituent across the country, no matter which state they live in, no matter the race, the religion, we have the exact same needs, we have the exact same problems. In other words, we may not agree as to the best way to solve the issue, but one thing remains constant. We all want solution for the same problem. But ironically, whenever a solution is proposed, no matter how good it is for the country, no matter how good it is for all the constituents, rest assured that the leaders of a political party, whatever that party is, would argue, would present a lot of different argument against that very solution. Yesterday we talked about, for instance, Obamacare. Now, Obamacare didn't start with Obama. I mentioned that former governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney, implemented universal health care in the state of Massachusetts. Yes, I'm sure it wasn't easy, but it passed. And everyone in Massachusetts, in fact, every time that I talk to someone in Massachusetts, they like it. They like the idea that you don't have to worry about the fact that you go to a hospital, you will be taken care of because, well, everybody is insured, either through your employer or you buy the insurance if you're able to. If not, the state takes care of it. The Democrats or Republicans. Now, this is just an example, and we can go down the line. And we have actually a list of issues that we will be discussing on the 4th branch to show that indeed there is not much difference between Democrats and Republicans, especially the constituent. And yet, for as long as I can remember, we've been talking about gridlock in Washington. Now, the very expression gridlock suggests that nothing can be done because Democrats cannot agree with Republicans and vice versa. So the question becomes, if there is not much difference between those two sides, why do we talk about gridlocks? Well, for the same reason that Of course, we've been talking about the topic of race relation in America, of racism, discrimination, almost a century beyond slavery. So how do we solve that problem? The answer is not really complicated. The solution actually is right in front of us. But the implementation of such, is going to take a little bit more than just partisanship, than just political affiliation. And if we can put that aside, I can guarantee you, we, the constituent, we, the people, can get the country to go forward, to move forward, regardless of what the politicians want, regardless of how much they push back. Because after all, we, the people, are the ones that matter.
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Stay with us. We will be right back.
We left yesterday talking about the Civil War, the bridge which connects the period of slavery in America and, of course, our modern time. Welcome to the Fourth Branch and welcome to Race Relation Discussion. If you join us for the first time, let me set the stage for you. First, the banner War on Blacks was exclusively picked to point to one major aspect of the race relation in America. Casualties have been mounting on the side of the blacks. Physical casualties, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, and yes, financial casualties. We acknowledge that there are two large groups of whites in the country. Millions are racist and discriminate. Million others are not racist and do not discriminate, which explain almost the impossibility of resolving racism, race relation in America. Here at the Fourth Branch, we have taken the step of going as far back as slavery to understand the interaction between blacks and white, to follow the path and understand why in the midst of the 21st century, whites continue to harbor sentiments against blacks who were tortured, executed, hung, And yet, today, blacks are considered the violent party, the criminal party. Now, in order to understand that, we took a huge leap back to the past, and we talked quite some about slavery. Now, we did not go through the detail of all the detail of slavery. There are hundreds, thousands of books written about that topic alone. But we debated aspect of slavery that would most likely help us understand the dynamic, the interactions, and of course the events, all the little detail behind the scenes that would eventually make way to the 21st century and perpetuate the racism and discrimination between those two parties. As I mentioned many times here during this program, we know both blacks and whites, there is not a single individual who is alive today who was there during slavery. We acknowledge that, we understand that. But we also mention that whites, especially those who are of the lineage of slave owners, cannot wash their hands off the current predicament, blacks' current predicament in the country. And there are plenty of reasons for that. We will get to that eventually, because at this point we are crossing a major bridge in the history of our country. It is bloody, it is treacherous, and there are plenty of casualties in the process. Now, for those in modern time, when we talk about slavery, it's just a word that simply suggests that at some point in the history of the United States, and of course it's across the world, but we only concern about here, the United States of America. In the history of our country, there was a time when blacks were slaves. They were captured from Africa, forced into a journey that would last weeks at a time, and sold as merchandise to whites. Now, I strongly suggest you take a look into the People Branch YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com in step 1. Go to youtube.com and on the search bar type People Branch. That's one word, People Branch. And it will present you with what you see on image 1 on the left hand side, or the right hand side rather, of the screen. That has the logo of People Branch. And if you click on it, what's on the right hand side or the left hand side, that would present you all the video of not only the race relation program, but all other programs that we have already created here on the 4th branch. It is necessary, and it will be quite enlightening to kind of follow the path that we took in order to get at the point where we are at now, which is the end of slavery, the Civil War. Now, throughout the time that we talk about race relation, of course, during slavery, there was no point of talking about race relation at all, because there was only one aspect of the interaction between blacks and whites. Whites were the slave owners and blacks were the slave. So however whites decided that the interaction should happen, that's how it happened. Blacks didn't have any way of changing that dynamic. Yes, they did try, they fled the scene, they escaped, they fought back, and so on and so forth. But the fact remains that whites dictated the whole aspect of how interaction between blacks and whites occurred. Tomorrow we will, at 10:30 a.m., this is hopefully the last mile on that bridge, the Civil War bridge. We will walk the last mile on that bridge in order to cross the bridge, leaving slavery behind, and now start debating issues, contemporaneous issues, which we can use and reflect back on those discussions we had to show where those type of sentiment, the type of detail that linger up to today, and the kind of structure of system in place that continue on, which make it possible that to talk today in the midst of the 21st century still about racism, about discrimination. Yes, it is necessary because there is no magic wand anyone can wave. There is no magic solution that anyone, any magical recipe that anyone can come up with in order to take care of this problem that has plagued the country for centuries. If you recall, there are three major factors that must be considered in order to solve any problem. One, to acknowledge the problem, identify the problem. Two, to understand the problem, the roots of the problem. And three, for the concerned parties, at the very least, to start negotiating, talking, and resolve the issue. Those three factors have to be there in order for the race relation issues that the country is confronting today could be resolved. There is no if and but about it. Now, the acknowledging part, which we discuss at length, also, once again, I strongly urge you to visit the People Branch YouTube channel. In the archive, you'll find under Race Relation, War on Blacks, or Institutionalized Racism, that all the topics that we discussed prior to today. Those topics will give some sort of reference to where we came from and where we're going with this discussion. Now, I must have said 1,000 times, and you probably will hear it 1,000 more times, because as long as we're talking about debating this particular issue, I will continue to mention that the racism, discrimination rampant in the United States. And it is not because of the white nationalists, and it is not because of the white supremacists. Now, what has made it possible for this sentiment to linger in our society, in the interaction between blacks and white, is the fact that both sides, for each side for a specific reason, decides not to talk about this issue, because the issue is awkward, it is sensitive, and blacks are very emotional, very angry about what their ancestors went through in the hands of whites. And whites are very defensive about that fact. In fact, I must say I've met and conversed with a few whites who simply really very defensive about the whole thing. And that's the reason I keep mentioning the fact that even if you weren't there during slavery, but you did not just the upbringing of any individual, you during the time that your education is you're getting your education from especially the from home, you carry a lot of information, a lot of baggage that is, I would say, difficult to get rid of. And in fact, it becomes so much part of one's life that even if it's not true, it is almost impossible to get rid of, and it is almost impossible for anyone to convince you otherwise, because you live through it, you've heard it over and over and over. So the idea of someone coming and tell you that it was all lies, you would be more inclined to simply discard that kind of statement. And as such, you find that whites are very inclined to believe whatever was passed down to them by previous generation. And I'm going to show you why today those same individuals, they harbor very negative sentiment towards black. I would say to no fault of theirs, but I cannot say that because those individuals are no longer kids. There are plenty of resources available to individuals who want to learn about the real facts of slavery for anyone to be able to come up to the conclusion that yes, the information that was passed to you was really bogus information, and there is a reason that your ancestors, your grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents passed those information to you. And we will get to that, but first we of course have to cross that large bridge, that treacherous bridge of the Civil War. Again, I'm not concerned about an individual, a white individual who is racist. I'm not concerned about the person I meet down the street, on the train, at the workplace, at school. I'm not at all concerned about any of that, because as I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, the person who doesn't like me because I'm black doesn't change anything about me. It doesn't make me feel any better or any worse. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the person's prerogative to like or not to like me. But when it comes to institutionalized racism, that's where I draw the line. That's where we come in, and this, we don't call it a fight. And I hate the word fight, because fighting almost suggests that you're trying to get something that either doesn't belong to you, or the word itself tell me that there is something wrong with the idea of having to fight for something that's legitimately everyone's should be everyone's a part of everyone's life. Because even in the very Constitution of the United States, the framers of the Constitution, to their great hypocrisy, say that all men are created equal. We're created equal. And yet, quite a few of them had slaves. So we're not debating that aspect, but I just want to make that point clear. So, the institutionalization of racism in America did not start yesterday. It started a long time ago. And this is what I think every black individual and every decent white individual should be concerned about institutionalized racism in America. Racism is action, words, and thought towards another individual which is based almost exclusively on external factors such as skin color. That's how racists think. They see a black person, they know nothing about the black person, they just happen not to like black people. But institutionalized racism is a system. See the difference? That's a system which nurtures, which condones, and even promotes racist behavior, actions, and languages. This is not small, this is not just an individual, this is not just someone who decide they don't like black, but it is a system that is in place. And we're going to show you that here in America, the system was put in place, still exists, and there are people today who pretend not to be racist, and yet they are aggressively working to make certain to perpetuate the institutionalization of racism. And that's where I think the danger is, because no one is watching. Everybody is so focused on looking at the white nationalists who are on the street protesting, the white supremacists who are on the street claiming that they too have right. So most, and interestingly enough, those people who belong to those groups don't want the spotlight. Don't think that protesting those individuals achieves anything. It doesn't. I remember during the protest in Charlottesville, I wrote an article suggesting that we could have shut down this protest if everyone would simply stay home and no press coverage. They just walk down the street and they would feel pretty bored because nobody would be watching them. There is no camera, there is nobody countering them, and you'd see that it would be a complete fiasco. But they want the confrontation, they want the spotlight, they want the media. In fact, that's the reason they do it, because the white supremacists, the white nationalists, they're very, very, very few. They're not responsible for racism and discrimination in America. I already mentioned that. In fact, all things being equal, I prefer to deal with a white supremacist because at least I know where that individual stands. But the subtle racism, the subtle discrimination, the institutionalized racism is the most difficult aspect of the whole conversation. Because you are black, you go and apply for a job, you don't get the job, not because you're not qualified, but because there is an institutionalization of racism, and you would never know that. In the past, they used to simply say you're not qualified, but they quickly realized that's the way institutionalization of a system works. They quickly realized that they're going to have problems, because how do you tell someone who has a master's degree, who has 10 years of experience in the field, that you're not qualified? So now they change the process and they say you're overqualified. So the system is put in place in order to perpetuate the institutionalization of racism. Now, I gave example before, and we will continue to do so as we continue to debate this aspect of the dynamic between blacks and whites in the United States. Now, why exactly in the midst of the 21st century, over 100 centuries beyond slavery, we in the United States still fighting the idea of racism and discrimination? And we have everyday example that will make the the end of this program almost impossible that will give enough material to show who are behind fueling this movement, and what do they gain. And in order to understand that, we have to remove our focus from the so-called white nationalists, white supremacists, because this is an area of comfort for blacks and whites alike, especially whites who are racist. It is the white supremacists, the white nationalists become the scapegoat for both sides, because nobody wants to talk about it, and everybody expects that maybe at some point there is a miracle that's going to happen, and then bingo, no more racism in America. It's not going to happen. In order to solve a problem, there are 3 factors to consider: recognize, identify the problem, understand the problem, and the concerned parties have to talk the detail and hash out a solution for the problem. So there is no when that can be waived. Not even Jesus can do that. We have to work out that problem. Now, when we return, we're going to continue crossing the bridge, the Civil War bridge, and in the process of crossing that bridge, we will show you the damages someone's sentiment, the damages that hatred for a group, for a race, can do. Not just to that group, but to a whole country.
Hi, I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the 4th Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
the Civil War happened because, well, depending on which angle you want to look at it. If different books look at the Civil War from different angle. Some think of the economic aspect of the South and the politics aspect and so on and so forth. So depending on which angle the writer, the authors were interested in, then you would read a book about the Civil War, and the notion of slavery will be most likely, there is no way around it, will be mentioned, but the focus will be on that angle that the authors or the writers pick. But no matter which angle the individuals decided to use as the focus of the writing, there was one single common denominator. There was one constant: slavery. Blacks were enslaved, tortured, hung, executed, to the point that people across the country were, well, whites obviously, across the country were looking at all different strategy to put an end to that nightmare. And there were many individual whites who put their lives on the line in order to put an end to slavery. That's why I say the discussion of race relations in America is a very, very difficult topic, because there are whites who are genuinely decent individuals who could not, and present here too, who could not stomach, who found the practice of slavery disgusting. They put their lives on the line for that. But at the same time, as we know, there were also millions of whites who found slavery was just fine. Which brings us to the Civil War. The Civil War happened because of slavery. Because there was one group who said yes to slavery, and there was another group who said no to slavery. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery. Now, according to historical record, there are two states, South Carolina and Mississippi, that actually wanted to split, to break relationship completely from the rest of the country. They simply did not want to be part of the United States because the noise idea of ending the slavery didn't sit well with them. So they thought maybe we should do something. But it did not happen in 1850. It wasn't until sometime around 1859, at the end of 1859, when the war started to have meaningful, if you like, meeting South Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. They start the process of really considering the idea of splitting from the United States. And when Abraham Lincoln became president, that was the last straw. They know where Abraham Lincoln stood. In fact, Abraham Lincoln said that as I would not be a slave, I would not be a master. That is my definition of democracy. That's the way Abraham Lincoln defined democracy. Now, before Abraham Lincoln, I discussed here in great detail a gentleman by the name of John Brown, white man, who did not have any relation whatsoever with black slaves, simply observing the type of treatment that his white counterpart were inflicting on black, decided to take matters into his own hands. And he went even a step further. He enlisted 5 of his sons to join the movement and to try to put an end to slavery. As you can see, there have always been whites who can clearly see when other whites doing what's wrong. So that's why you cannot paint everyone with a single brush. You cannot meet a white individual on the street and decide all whites are racist. Unfortunately, that's not possible, because it would have been nice to be able to identify those who are racist and those who are not. But that's not possible. Now, those states, the one in red, considered the Confederate state. Those are the states which decided to split from the United States. The state in pink were actually, the state in red are not only Confederate state, but there were states that actually were pro-slavery and wanted to split from the United States because they want to keep slavery around. Now, the state in pink did allow slavery, but interestingly enough, they sided with the Union in order to fight against the state that wanted to keep slavery around. Kind of an interesting twist there. Now, the states, the state that started this process: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia. Virginia, you may recall, was the state in which the first shipment of black was dropped there. In fact, you can say, in all fairness, that slavery started there in Virginia. Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arizona territory. That's before there was and later on, you have West Virginia added to the mix. Now, the Civil War, as mentioned, started because of this guy, Abraham Lincoln. Well, not because of this guy, because he wanted to put an end to slavery. Now, what I wanted to talk about today is to give you a sense of what it means to lack decency and to have hatred towards a group, any group. Today, as you are well aware, there are plenty of people, Republicans in particular, who are gung-ho against the idea of LGBT. One thing that I learned in life, and you hear it through history, and we're not talking about just here in the United States, every time, and it never fails, every time that you see there is a group that decide to go against another group because of some ideas that they have, that whatever that group is or whatever that group does they don't like, and they go against that group, you can rest assured history will prove the antagonizing group, the antagonizing individuals wrong about their ideas. Case in point, you had those white slave owners fighting with their lives because as far as they were concerned, blacks were supposed to be slaves. They considered them not human. You may recall that blacks were considered 3/5 of, or counted rather, as 3/5 of a person. You may even recall that Dred Scott went to court with his master, and the court decided that he didn't have any right. So we're not talking about just individual, and that's what I referred to earlier when we were talking about institutionalized racism. It's not just an individual, it's a whole system that makes certain that blacks always have mountain to climb, obstacles, plenty of it. The Civil War. According to historical record, now here's what happened. On the Confederate side, there were approximately between 750,000 people to 1 million people who decided we're going to fight to keep slavery around. No match to 2.2 million on the Union side. No match at all. But that's not really what was of interest to me. What was of interest to me is the casualties. The casualties caused because millions of individuals, white individuals, did not have any decency, could not come to their senses, and there was no one, not a single individual, who could rise up to the occasion and say, guys, that is not right. We cannot put our lives and those of others in jeopardy for something wrong that we're doing. Not a single one. If you fast forward to today, nothing has changed. We saw during the first 2 years of the Republican pretty much running the government, that they let everything running amok. As far as the Constitution, it didn't matter what the executive branch was doing. It did not matter that the executive branch was just trampling the rule of law. Nothing has changed when it comes to the Republicans. Yes, at that time, the party that was the Red Party was the Democrats. It was called Democrat, but it's the same principle. And it's the same Democrats that turned Republicans. That's today, they are exactly the same way. Not a single individual in the Republican Party during those 2 years did have the decency, the sense to see that the country is being shredded, the Constitution is trashed, the rule of law ignored, and yet not a single individual. And that's exactly what happened during the Civil War. There was not a single individual who could not see anything wrong to fight to keep slavery around. As a result, There were 828,000 casualties on the Union side, 864,000 casualties on the Confederate side. Yes, the Confederate side did capitulate and surrender. Historical records say there were approximately anywhere between 616,000 to 1 million people who died. There were 80 slaves who died of diseases of all sorts, and there were 50,000 civilians who died on that war. It was a bloody war. The bridge to leave slavery behind, filled with dead people, filled with wounded people, all of that did not prevent the sentiment to cross that bridge and for our society to continue to suffer the treatment, at least blacks, the treatment, the same type of treatment, the same sort or similar treatment that were inflicted on blacks in that period of time. Yes, casualties, there are plenty. And the war on blacks continue.
Hi, I am MD, host of the 4th branch program. War on blacks is a new topic added to the 4th branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
How do you save a drowning man who is convinced he is a great swimmer, even though he hasn't swum a single day in his life. Puzzle. This is the predicament the country is in today, with millions of people who believe they done the right thing by voting in office an individual who is incompetent, an individual who is by any stretch of the imaginations a crook, a liar. But those millions of people convinced they did the very right thing. I would say to no fault of theirs, and there is some truth to it. You see, the framers of the Constitution did set the system in such a way that every state decides, or citizen, resident of every state decides to elect someone to represent them in Washington. Now each state has to send 2 senators. Now, depending on the size and the population of the state, the number of congressmen varies. But those individuals are called leaders, and their job is not just to be a politician, to attend to their personal affairs, but rather to represent the resident of the state who elected them. And every so often, the resident of the state have the privilege, the opportunity rather, of going back and decide whether to keep that individual or replace him or her with somebody else. Now, if we look at the past 70 years, you would notice that most senators, congressmen spend a lifetime in Washington, 20, 30, 40 years, which means the resident of a particular state keep electing, re-electing, re-electing, re-electing the same individual. And the reason becomes very clear. Resident of the state will continue to vote for someone who identify with the political party, irrespective of what the person does, or what the person has done, or whether the person has done anything at all. So in a sense, we could say that the very people who are responsible of the problem the country is going through now are the people, because they're the one who continue to make the wrong decision. Now, if you take a look of the past 50 years, and this is not just conversation for the sake of conversation. If you take a look for the past 50 years, you would notice something that should scare you. Republicans have not done anything to get elected or re-elected, but they have become masters of deception, and they get elected and re-elected based almost exclusively on the fear of their respective of their constituent for their respective state. What does that mean? Now, I did take the example yesterday of the Healthcare Act, the 2010 Healthcare Act we all come to know under Obamacare. Republican ran campaign on scaring rather their constituent from Obamacare. It's a death panel. It's gonna cost jobs. It's gonna destroy the economy. That's not politics. Politics is when someone is able to outwit the other individual or the other party, and you say, that was brilliant. I can give you a couple of examples, one on the Democrat side and one on the Republican side. For instance, during the shutdown, Nancy Pelosi did something that was purely political and brilliant. And she did it really brilliantly. Shut down and no one was budging, and here came that date for Donald Trump to deliver his state of address of the union. Nancy Pelosi say, Mr. President, I am afraid that you may have to postpone that speech because, we don't have any individual to ensure your security. That was brilliant. That's politics. Now, one thing that happened in the past was Mitch McConnell, who did actually two things. One, he managed to prevent the Obama administration from putting a judge on the federal bench. Now, you can argue all the detail about how sneaky that was and so on and so forth. That's besides the point. But he managed to work his strategy and prevent that from happening. And he also managed to put someone on the Supreme Court that everybody hated. Talking about Brett Kavanaugh. So you could call those two examples politics, because they show that those two individuals, they use politics as a way to get whatever they want to happen. But telling your constituent that Obamacare is a death panel is not politics, it's deception, because they know that wasn't true. They were simply using scare tactic to rally support for something that they didn't want. That's deception. Telling the constituent that it's going to cost job also, that wasn't politics, that was scaring the constituent. Now, I'm using just the Obama example, but we will continue to show you that this has become the only tool Republicans have in order to get elected or re-elected, because they don't have anything to offer. Remember, I mentioned to you that for 62 times they tried to repeal Obamacare, but not a single time did they have anything to substitute for it. That tells you, that should tell you, that Republicans simply use scare tactic in order to rally support, and it is deception. Now, I mention all that for a reason. Today, you can already see the writing on the wall because you start hearing the sound of the 2020 election campaign introduced by Donald Trump during his speech. Now he said that Democrats are trying to turn the country into a socialist country. What does that mean exactly? What does it mean when when anyone says that? Now, the sad part about the story is the fact that millions of people, Republicans in particular, and I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again, they're very naive, very gullible, and whenever Republicans tell them something, Republican so-called leaders, they buy it. They believe it. And as I mentioned earlier, Republicans have resorted to one way and one way alone to get elected and re-elected is the politics of fear. They don't have anything to offer. Now, what does that mean that Democrats are want to turn the country into a socialist country? Now, think about it. Do they really believe that's the case? Or what does that mean exactly when they say that? All they're trying to do is, by saying, trying to turn the country into a socialist country, and guess what come to mind? Nobody cares to find out what that means. Nobody cares that's not even remotely possible. Oh, I don't want a socialist country, so I'm not voting for Democrats. What does that mean when they say that? Now, let me ask you, because I remember that very conversation about Obamacare. I remember it very clearly because I had colleagues of mine who were having this argument. Oh, I don't want to take my money and give to fund Obamacare. That's socialism. And we're not talking about people who didn't go to school. We're talking about college-educated individuals. So when I say ignorant, I'm not talking about people who didn't go to school, people who didn't go to college. I'm talking about people you expect to have at least an average intelligence in order to comprehend that those are made up things by their so-called leaders in order to scare them to vote one way or the other. Those are not politics, as I mentioned. Those are deception. Because if you have to lie to someone in order to get that person's vote, this is not politics. And that's what Republicans have been doing. They using the scare tactic, the monster tactic, the monster technique rather, to scare the hell out of their constituent in order to get their vote. Now, Republicans are out in full force saying that, oh my God, Democrats want to turn America into a socialist country. And you start hearing the sound louder and louder. It came from Donald Trump during the speech. Now you tune into Fox and you hear it over and over and over and over. Now, what does that mean when someone says that? Now, those people who all of a sudden become so scared of socialism, do they have any idea what it takes to change a system of government from one form to the other? Especially a country like the United States that has so many different agencies, so many different aspects of the government that would require so much lifting to get to that point, and yet the millions of people who Republicans are trying to scare into the idea that, oh my God, Democrats want to turn America into a socialist country. They already drumming the beat and say, no, we don't want a socialist country, so we're not voting for Democrats. Now, what do you see there? They do not have anything to offer, because in order for you not to use the scare tactic, you have to offer something, right? But when you don't have anything to offer, what do? You scare everyone. And that's what, for the past 50 years, go as far back as you can and watch exactly what Republican legislators, congressmen, senators, governors, mayors, president, watch what they've been doing. The scare tactic. In other words, your Republican leaders do not have anything to offer you. Absolutely nothing, so they do what they can do best. Scare you. To believe anything, and the more that they say it, the more that they say it, and the more that they say it, the more you get to believe it. It's something that they actually borrow from Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler said, if you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. And Republicans have adopted this strategy for as long as I can remember. Yes, Adolf Hitler, that was his mantra. That was his way of governing. If you tell a big enough lie and you tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. And that's the strategy, coupled with the politics of fear, Republicans have stayed in Washington for decades. And if you watch, if you look, they have not offered much. They say they are fiscally conservative. Look at the record. Are they? They say they are Christian. Look at the records. Are they? Yes, your Republican legislators, elected officials, they rely exclusively on deception and fear. Because what do they have to offer? So the sound that Democrats want to turn the country into a socialist country, you're going to hear that chorus over and over and over and over until, guess what? It will become believable. And that's the only way Republicans know how to keep the job that they have. They don't have to do anything. Scare the constituent, the Republican constituent that is, scare them enough not to want to look at the other side. And bingo, what do we have? We have currently a country that clearly shows you that the Republican Party is not worth anything. It's a bunch of people that just there because the constituent placed them there, but they do not achieve, they do not do anything for the sake of the country. They say they're patriot. Are they? Look at what has happened to the United States of America. Where were the Republicans? Instead of anything, they actually support what the very action that served to destroy the institution the institution actually which have made the America the envy of the world. Donald Trump leading the pack, Republican supporting it. Now, this conversation, as I mentioned before at the top of this conversation, it is not easy to save a drowning man who believes he is a great swimmer from drowning. And that's the state of affairs in the country, because those individuals who have plunged the country in the predicament the country is in believe nothing is wrong. Things are great. Things cannot be any better. What are we talking about? Read my article, To Hell with the United States. We'll be right back.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or, would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
I do thank you for spending the time with me. I hope these information were enlightening. Should you have any questions, suggestions, comment, criticism, do not hesitate to contact us. And if you have a particular topic you would be interested in having us talk about, we would research it and debate it right here on the Fourth Branch. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and hope to see you again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. when we continue the conversation about the Civil War. We will finish the last mile on that bridge. You don't want to miss that conversation. And we will be talking about our modern time, racism in modern time. Have a good day.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchenne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the fourth branch, live from New York. Good day.